Hey everyone, we're just going to get started in a few minutes, so hang tight and we'll be with you in just a moment. Thanks for joining tonight. Hi everyone, thanks for joining tonight. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Thanks for being here, and we'll give folks a few minutes to trickle in. We'll give it just one more minute to allow folks to trickle in, and then we'll get started. All right, thanks for joining everyone. Thanks everyone. My name is Amy Salata. I'm the Outreach and Advocacy Manager at the Student Borrower Protection Center, and we're a national nonprofit policy organization focused solely on alleviating the burden of student debt in the country. And we do this through a mixture of advocacy, policy making, and litigation strategy to rein in industry abuses, protect borrowers' rights, and advance economic opportunity for the next generation of students. I'm really excited to be here with you tonight. Thank you so much for to the Denver Housing Authority for inviting me. Really excited to be here. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, if you could throw them in the Q&A, either during the presentation or at the end, that would be really helpful. There's also a chat feature that I think goes just to me, and you know, if you can't hear me or something, that might be a good place to do that, but it'll just be easier for me to sort through them at the end if you can put them in the Q&A. Okay, so tonight we're talking about a lot of things. There are a lot of things happening in the student loan system, and I'm going to do my best to go over some of the highlights and talk about what you need to do to get on track for certain programs. And certainly if you have any questions that are outside of the scope of this presentation, feel free to ask them, and I'll do my best to answer them. And if I can't, then I'll follow up with you later. But let's get started with an agenda. So here's what we're going to review tonight. We're going to review the Supreme Court decision and President Biden's debt relief plan. In addition, there are some programmatic changes to something called the IDR Account Adjustment and how that interacts with public service loan forgiveness, which some of you might be familiar with already. And then there's this initiative called Fresh Start, which is for borrowers who are currently in default. And it's an easier way to get out of default. And then we know now that payments are returning in September and October. And so I'll go over that and what that means. And then we'll get to some important takeaways, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. But again, feel free to throw anything in the Q&A while I'm talking as well. Okay, so let's get started. So first, probably top of people's mind is the Supreme Court decision that we are expecting any day now. There are decision days set for the next 2 weeks or so, and the Supreme Court session ends at the end of June, typically. Sometimes it goes into the first week of July, but we're really expecting a decision any day in the next 2 weeks. So we're getting ready for this. But let's just review the parameters of the program at first so that you can get a better understanding of it and know what to do if and when that decision comes down. So President Biden announced a plan in August of last year that would provide up to $20,000 in debt cancellation for folks who used a Pell Grant at any point in their educational career, and then up to $10,000 in federal student debt cancellation for anyone else who has a federal student loan. There are income caps to this plan. And so those are that if you make under $125,000 as an individual, you're eligible. And if you make under $250,000 as a married couple or a head of household, you're eligible. Everyone must apply. This has an application process, and this application process was open very briefly in the fall. I want to say about 8 to 10 weeks. And during that time, 26 million people submitted applications, which is an incredible testament to how popular and necessary this plan was, that 26 million people applied. Surely you can appreciate that getting 26 million people to do anything is quite a feat. And during that time, of that 26 million, 16 million people are already processed and they're in the queue. They're approved for cancellation. But as you may know, a federal judge in Texas and a panel of judges in Missouri blocked President Biden's debt relief plan. And when that happened, they weren't able to accept applications any longer. They weren't able to administer the program. And so those people are just kind of waiting in limbo now. They're approved, but their debt hasn't yet been canceled. We heard oral arguments for the Supreme Court case in February, and we had a huge rally outside of the Supreme Court to let them know that we weren't going away, that the borrowers need this relief desperately. We're very confident that the administration's legal authority is clear, that they can that they have the authority to do this, and that if it doesn't, if the Supreme Court decision comes down negatively, there isn't that we can find another path to get debt relief for folks in the United States. So there are some things that you should know that if you've already applied or if you haven't yet applied for this debt relief plan. So if you already applied, if you're one of those 26 million people that applied in the fall, you should have received a confirmation email. So you could check to make sure you received that. The department is also going to keep applications on file as we're awaiting a decision. And unless you hear from the Department of Education, you don't need to do anything else. They're going to contact folks via email. This is an important piece because with so much moving in the student loan system, no one's going to be calling you to ask you for money to get immediate debt relief. The Department of Education will always email you. And so if you know someone's calling you, that might be a red flag that it's a scam. It's always a good practice to make sure your contact information is up to date with both your servicer and with the Department of Education at studentaid.gov. And then you can also sign up for these subscriptions here at ed.gov/subscriptions. And that's a good idea whether you've applied or not, because when the application becomes live again, that'll be the way that they notify folks that the application's live. If you haven't yet applied, you could confirm your eligibility and check to see if you ever received a Pell Grant to pay for any point of your education. And then also confirm that you have qualifying loans. There's a list of those qualifying loans at ed.gov or at studentaid.gov for President Biden's debt relief plan. All right, so as we await a decision, there are some other things that we can do right now to get you on track for debt cancellation in different ways. These programs are all discrete. So President Biden's debt relief plan is one thing. That's the $10,000 or $20,000 of relief, and that's currently before the Supreme Court. That is the only thing that the Supreme Court decision will affect. That's the only program that that'll affect. There are some other things that you can do in the meantime that might help you out in the short or long run. So one of these things is the IDR Account Adjustment. So when you're repaying your loans, there are these payment plans called income-driven repayment plans, or IDR plans. Under these plans, they're pegged to your income. And so they're often more affordable for folks than the standard plan, which pays down your debt after 10 years. So after 10 years, you're making, the same monthly payment for 10 whole years, and then your debt is, completely gone because you paid it off. Under income-driven repayment plans, you're paying a lower amount that's based on your income. And something really frustrating can happen which is that you're paying your loans every month, but you might not be touching the principal. Maybe you're only touching the interest, or maybe even a portion of the interest. And so you're doing everything right. You're paying on time, but you're logging into your account and you're seeing your principal just balloon because you're only making the minimum payment under the income-driven repayment plans. The Department of Education knew that this was an issue when they kind of made these plans. And so what they did is they made the plans so that after 20 or 25 years in repayment, your debt would be canceled after that time. After making payments for 20 or 25 years, it's 20 years if you only have undergraduate debt, and 25 years if you have both undergraduate and graduate debt. After that amount of time, your debt will be canceled because you put that amount of time into it. However, so last year in April, a Government Accountability Office report and an accompanying NPR story, you could Google this if you want, it's an accompanying NPR story detailed that servicers have no way of tracking this information. So they haven't been tracking how close people are to that 20 or 25 year threshold. They also were routinely steering people into forbearance and deferment when they were eligible for income-driven repayment plans that might have kept them on track towards cancellation and might have been, kept them on, in repayment and able to kind of achieve cancellation after this 20 or 25 year mark. So this came out last year, and to rectify this, the Department of Education announced something called the IDR Account Adjustment. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. I know that is a very long explanation on this title slide, but here we go. So essentially what the IDR account adjustment is that the Department of Education is going to be doing a one-time revision of all accounts, all federal accounts, to see how close people are to this 20 or 25 year mark of being in repayment. They're basically going to count any time that you've been in repayment, and they're going to count any time excluding time that was spent in default and excluding time that was spent in school deferment. That's when you're enrolled in school and you are placed on a deferment period because you're you're in school. So they're going to count these things. So they're going to count any time that you've been in repayment, any forbearances that you've had up to 12 consecutive months, over 36 cumulative months, or if there are other forbearances that you want the Department of Education to investigate, you can submit a complaint to the Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson to get those forbearances looked at to see if they're eligible for time under the IDR account adjustment. In addition, any deferments prior to the year 2013. And then you're able to get credit before consolidation. So for those of you who are familiar with the PSLF program, first, consolidating is basically, it's like refinancing with the federal government. And what it does is it pays off your old loan and takes out a new loan. And so when people did this to get on track for PSLF in particular, public service loan forgiveness, they lost any credit that they had gained towards cancellation under PSLF, because you're essentially taking out a new loan and paying off the old loan. So you're starting at zero again. But in this case, you're, through this IDR account adjustment, you're able to keep that past credit if you consolidate. And in fact, some people must consolidate in order to take part in this IDR account adjustment. So for most folks, this is going to be automatic. However, if you have FFEL loans that are not currently owned by the Department of Education, or if you have Perkins loans, you have to consolidate in order to participate. I'll get into what that means in just a slide or two. Another really nice thing is that any time that you accrue towards, the IDR account adjustment also counts for PSLF. And so if you're, seeking public service loan forgiveness after 10 years of, working in public service, all this time, these forbearances, these deferments will count towards PSLF credit as well, as long as you're working in a public service institution. So we've been talking a little bit about what type of federal student loans you have. This can be really confusing and many folks don't necessarily know this. You think this should be an easy question to answer, what type of loans do I have? But that isn't always the case. And in fact, it's probably more often than not the case that people don't understand. So one thing that you could do to figure this out is to log into studentaid.gov and look at your dashboard. There, you're going to have a dashboard that lists your loans. And within that dashboard, you'll need to pay attention to the ones that have a balance, because you're looking to, get those canceled. Any loan that has a zero balance, you don't need to worry about, because you're not looking to get that loan canceled. You can also download your aid data, which gives you a more granular report of what your loan types are. And when you're in here, so for this income-driven repayment account adjustment, I want to talk a little bit about FFELP loans, which are Federal Family Education Loan Program loans. This was the main lending program before 2010. So if you took out a loan after 2010, it's most likely a direct loan. That became the main loan program. Direct loans are eligible for PSLF. I'll get into that in a moment. But for federal family education loans, there are two types. There are some that are owned by the federal government, and there are some that are owned by a private or commercial lender. So the distinction is important, because for those that are owned by the Department of Education, they don't need to be consolidated for the IDR account adjustment. And for those that are owned by a private lender, they do need to be consolidated in order to participate in the IDR account adjustment. So this is what a person's dashboard looks like when you log into studentaid.gov. It'll have these different loans listed, and it'll say who your loans are held or serviced by. This second block you can see here, it says Wells Fargo Bank pretty clearly, and that's a private lender. So you know that your FFELP loan is owned by a private lender. And this fourth block at the bottom says Department of Education / MOHELA. So if it says Department of Education, you know that it's owned by the U.S. Department of Education. Another really easy way to tell is if you've been receiving the payment pause, you have loans that are held by the Department of Education. And if you have been required to make payments during this time, during the payment pause, you likely have a commercial FFELP loan. And so this distinction is very important, because it affects what you are able to apply for. Sorry, someone just sent me a message. We are good. Okay, thank you. All right, so keep this in mind, that we're going to be talking a lot about different types of loans and what you're eligible for with these different types of loans. And so really your shooting off point, your base point should be studentaid.gov, and trying to figure out what type of loans you have based on your dashboard. Okay, so to participate in the IDR account adjustment, you want to check your student loans and what type you have at studentaid.gov. And if you don't have any, if you have non-ed held loans, you need to consolidate before December 31st of this year in order to participate in this IDR account adjustment. So this deadline is very important. Please keep it in mind. This is the deadline by which you need to consolidate. So again, this is the deadline. The department is going to start adjusting the accounts of those that have been in repayment longest. So those that have already passed that 20-year mark if you've only had undergraduate loans, or past that 25-year mark if you have a mixture of undergraduate and graduate loans. And then also the department will begin adjusting the accounts of those who have submitted PSLF forms and who are past the threshold of 10 years for PSLF. And so these are the accounts that will be done first, those who have been in repayment longest. Everyone else is going to see their accounts adjusted in 2024. Since the deadline is December 31st of this year, they'll need some time to process everyone. So in 2024, they're expecting to have all of their accounts adjusted. Okay, so now we're going to review how the IDR account adjustment interacts with this public service loan forgiveness program, which might be of interest to some of you on the call. As you may know, Congress created the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program in 2007 as a way to help, public service workers who are struggling with their student loans, but also to help, graduates and folks, working in the public sector, folks, they didn't want student loans to be a reason that would deter folks from entering the public service. And so how the program works is that there are typically 4 requirements for this program. They are that you need to have the right type of loan, which is a direct loan. Remember, I said that a direct loan has been the main type of federal loan since 2010. So if you took out a loan since then, you probably already have a direct loan. If you have another type of loan, say you have a FELP loan, like I just mentioned, or you have a Perkins loan, those loans you can consolidate to make them eligible for public service loan forgiveness. This was one of the historical issues with the program. When people consolidated and when people learned that they need to consolidate to get direct loans in order to qualify for PSLF, folks were consolidating and they didn't realize that the clock would start back at 0. And so they had lost any credit that they had gained towards PSLF credit, which was really frustrating for folks. So this moment in time is meant to rectify that, but I'll get to that in a moment. So that's the first thing. You have to have the right type of loan, which is a direct loan. You need to be in the right repayment plan, which for the program is generally an income-driven repayment plan. There are 4 of these plans. One is income-based repayment, or IBR, income contingent repayment, or ICR, pay, which is pay as you earn, and repay, which is revised pay as you earn. Third, you need to be in the right type of employment, which is working full-time, which is defined as 30 hours a week. For a public service entity, which is any level of government, so that's federal, state, local, or tribal governments, or a 501c3 nonprofit, or certain other nonprofits based on the type of work that you do. Something that falls into that category most often is something like emergency services. Maybe you're a first responder, but you're not incorporated into the county government, and maybe you're not your own 501c3, but because of the work that they do, the Department of Education allows certain other nonprofits to apply for PSLF as well. Finally, you need to make the right number of payments, which is 120 payments, or 10 years worth of payments, while meeting all the other requirements. So you have to make 120 payments on direct loan, while in an income-driven repayment plan, and while working in the public service full-time. So this is how the program has typically worked, and these are the general requirements of the program. One really nice thing about the payment pause is that all these months that we've been on payment pause, those months count towards the 120 payments that you need to reach PSLF. But you still need to meet the other criteria, and the most relevant is the public service employer. So if you've been receiving the payment pause for the last 3.5 years or so, all that time counts towards PSLF credit, even though you haven't been making payments, which is really a lifesaver for a lot of folks working towards PSLF. So let's talk a little bit about how these two things interact. Essentially, you're able to get retroactive credit towards PSLF, even if you worked at a past nonprofit or a past government agency. So you're able to get that retroactive credit, and you're able to kind of correct course now without having many negative effects. So like I said, when you consolidated before, you started back at 0. Right now, you're in this moment in time, if you consolidate before December 31st, you're able to keep that past credit and apply it to the new consolidated loan, which is huge. This moment in time works if any of you are familiar with the PSLF waiver that was in effect from October of 2021 to October of 2022. It works very similarly to the waiver, and it's okay if you're not familiar with that, but the main difference between right now and the waiver is that you have to be currently working in the public service to get this retroactive credit and get on track for PSLF. You can't be retired and apply for PSLF. But essentially what the IDR account adjustment does is it waives these two first requirements and allows folks to get caught up. So if you need to consolidate and get a direct loan in order to qualify for PSLF, now is a good time to do it because you can keep that past credit after you consolidate. And then, if you haven't previously been on a qualifying payment plan, like an IDR plan, you can get on one now in order to be on track. So What this means is that it's not completely automatic, that there are some action steps, particularly if you have those Fell or Perkins loans that I was talking about, or any other loan that's not a direct loan when you log into studentaid.gov. Those will need to be consolidated in order to be eligible for PSLF. The other thing that you have to do is you could file a PSLF form if you haven't done this previously. PSLF forms are just kind of the form that you need to certify your employment with the Department of Education. It's essentially a form that says, I worked at this agency from this date to this date, and my employer agrees with me, and they signed off on my time that I've spent there. You can fill out a PSLF form by going to studentaid.gov, and there's something called the PSLF help tool there. It's a step-by-step guide on how to submit forms, and you can, get you might have multiple forms, right? So if you've worked for multiple public service entities since October 1st of 2007, you'll have as many forms as you have had employers or public service employers. And so you'll need each of those forms signed by those agencies and then sent to MOHELA, which is the exclusive servicer for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Now I want to note that, the consolidation deadline again is December 31st of this year. PSLF forms can be submitted at any time. However, it's always great to have them in as soon as possible. There have been a lot of historical issues with the PSLF program, and so we recommend that you file a PSLF form every year that you're working for a nonprofit or a government entity, and then do it every time you switch jobs. So if you're switching public service employers, do it every time you switch jobs. You don't have to do this. You could document everything after 10 years, but this way, if you're doing it once a year and every time you switch jobs, this is a great way of catching any mistakes that could be made and catching them in real time and dealing with them. Okay, so I have a note on Parent Plus borrowers. So Parent Plus loans are loans that parents take out to help with their children's education. So they take them out in their name, but they're for their child. Parent Plus loans were excluded from the PSLF waiver that I've mentioned. That was, in effect for, about a year, a few months ago. And now the Department of Education has said that Parent Plus borrowers can get PSLF credit through this IDR account adjustment, which is huge because they were excluded from the waiver in the first place. So what it means is that you can get PSLF credit. And what you need to do is you need to submit PSLF forms for any past public service you've had since October 1st of 2007. And you might want to consider consolidating to get on an income-driven repayment plan if you're not already at 10 years in public service, because you'll need to keep accruing credits after the IDR account adjustment, is completed. It also might, it might be more affordable to stay on the standard plan for someone with a Parent Plus loan because we've been in the payment pause for the past 3.5 years. And so because you haven't had to make payments for the past 3.5 years, it might be more affordable for you to stay on the standard plan, which again is that plan that, pays off the entire amount of the loan in 10 years. So Parent Plus borrowers will need to weigh those two options between, consolidating to get on an income-driven repayment plan or staying on the standard plan in order to get PSLF credit. So that's something to consider. Remember, December 31st is the deadline to act to consolidate if you have those non-direct loans and you're seeking PSLF. And then let's just go through these steps again. So log into studentaid.gov and figure out what type of loans you have. If you don't have direct loans, you'll need to consolidate before December 31st of this year. If you have Parent Plus loans, you could consider consolidating to get on an income-driven repayment plan, or you could stay on the standard plan. And then finally submit PSLF forms for all public service work that you've had since October 1st of 2007. Okay, I'm happy to answer any questions about PSLF at the end as well. I know this is a ton of information. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about an initiative called Fresh Start. So currently there are about 7 million people in default, which really, wrecks people's credit. It's, incredibly distressing for folks. And so to rectify this, the Department of Education announced this Fresh Start initiative, which will get people out of default. It has the potential to get 7 million people out of default And what it does for borrowers is it immediately restores repayment options for folks, including those income-driven repayment plans that I mentioned. And the nice thing that might be particularly useful for folks in default is that if you are, if you are receiving a very low income each year, you might qualify for a very low monthly payment based on the IDR plans. You also might qualify for a $0 payment a month under income-driven repayment plans. And so this Fresh Start initiative really gets folks back on track, back in repayment status, so that it's not affecting their credit negatively. It's really going to be useful for a lot of folks. It also immediately restores your eligibility to go back to school. So if you want to, pursue an education again, that's something that this Fresh Start initiative also does. Now, if you're in default, there are typically two ways out of default. You can consolidate, or you could rehabilitate to get out of default. Rehabilitation is a pretty onerous and cumbersome process. It takes about 10 months. The Department of Education will monitor your payments each month to make sure that you're making payments on time, that you're able to make payments. And so Fresh Start is really an easier way out of default. But if you use that one-time rehabilitation option during the payment pause, it'll be automatically restored if you use that at that time. So that's another benefit of Fresh Start. And then, of course, it'll fix your credit score, and it'll also, save folks from involuntary collections as well. Here are the eligible loans for a Fresh Start. So they must have defaulted prior to March 13th of 2020. That's when the payment pause began. And because of the payment pause and some other guidance from the Department of Education, no borrower should have been defaulting after March 13th of 2020. And then these are the eligible loans that fall into that. So any direct loans, any FFEL loans, which includes both the ones that are held by the Department of Education and the ones that are held by private lenders. And then any ed-held Perkins loans are also eligible too. These are the list. This is the list of ineligible defaulted loans. I'm not going to read through these. This is a smaller piece of the pie, but just in case this is useful to any of you on the call, these are the loans that are ineligible for Fresh Start. Okay. Now, like most of the things on this call, there are some action items that you need to take in order to benefit from Fresh Start. Basically, you have 1 year after the payment pause ends, which we'll get into in the next few slides, to do one of two things. You could communicate with the default resolution group or your guarantee agency to get on a repayment plan. So you request a repayment plan, or you could request financial aid from an eligible school. So those are the two options that you have to get out of default through Fresh Start. If you choose the latter option by requesting aid at an eligible school, schools will need to get a signed statement from you saying that you agree to have your loans transferred to a non-default servicer. But for borrowers who don't do one of the options here, they will be placed back in default using the original date of delinquency. So this is very time sensitive, right? People have a year to do this after the payment pause ends. And it's really a lifeline to folks who are in default. So yeah, this is the Fresh Start initiative. Okay, now very briefly, I'm going to go over payments restarting and just a couple tips to kind of prepare for that. So as you may have heard, the debt ceiling agreement that was signed into law by President Biden had a provision in it that ended the payment pause, that put that in stone for us. Originally, the payment pause was set to end either 60 days after June 30th or 60 days after a final disposition from the Supreme Court. But now we have a date that's set in stone that likely won't be changed. And so what we're dealing with is that interest will start accruing on September 1st, and payments will be due in October. The first payments will be due in October. So some tips for kind of preparing for this. It's always good practice to update your contact information. So many people moved during the pandemic. It's a great practice. And so just make sure your contact information is up to date with your servicer and with studentaid.gov. Remember that you can request a refund for any payments that you've made after March 13th of 2020. even payments that were made on your behalf, you can request a refund for those payments. And, you know, someone who might want to do this is someone who's seeking PSLF, right? If you're hoping that your debt will get canceled through PSLF after 10 years in the public service, then, you know, this might be a little bit of extra money in your pocket. All you have to do is call your servicer and request a refund for any payments that were made since March 13th of 2020. With income-driven repayment plans, since it's based on your income, every year you need to recertify your income and, you know, tell your servicer that this is your income so that they can calculate your monthly payment. And so usually that required, you know, a bit of paperwork, like a W-2 or a tax statement or a pay stub, or a letter from your employer. So there were a couple of options, but it involved paperwork. During the payment pause, they started accepting verbal income-driven repayment recertifications. And so that is something that they are continuing to do for now. But you know, it's a good reminder to continue to re-enroll and recertify your income-driven repayment plans each year as it comes up. And then finally, if you were having payments auto-debited from your account before the payment pause began, those should not be automatically done again. So the Department of Education has said that unless people proactively call their servicer and ask to be put on an auto-debited plan, they should not be happening. So I guess like this is kind of twofold. You know, if you want auto-debited payments to happen, call your servicer and get on auto-debited payments. But then, you know, second, if you notice that your payments are being auto-debited come October, they shouldn't be, and you didn't request that, you know, they shouldn't be happening. And so, you know, it might require a little bit of vigilance around October to make sure that your payments aren't auto-deducting from your account. All right, so I know that was a lot of information. Let's review some important takeaways, and then we can get to your questions. Okay, so the Supreme Court decision is coming any day now. Stay tuned, and that'll affect whether or not that $10,000 or $20,000 in relief will be eligible, you know, around for folks with federal student loans. Log into studentaid.gov and check what type of loans you have, because it affects your eligibility for different programs. Namely, you know, if you have FFELP loans that are not currently held by the Department of Education, they'll need to be consolidated before December 31st of this year. And then if you have non-direct loans, they'll need to be consolidated before December 31st of this year if you're seeking PSLF. If you are interested in Fresh Start, remember to do the action items there, which are, you know, to either request to be put on a repayment plan by your guarantee agency or by the default resolution group, or you could request aid from an eligible school. Also, if you're seeking PSLF, don't forget to fill out your PSLF forms and get those sent in. Couple more things. So you can tell from this presentation that there is so much moving, and it has changed pretty much every week. And so there are a lot of people that are going to be looking to take advantage of that. So just be aware of scams. You know, the Department of Education won't call you. Certainly folks that are calling you to ask for money and in order to provide you with immediate debt relief, that should be a red flag. So just be aware that there's a lot moving and people are going to look to take advantage of that. Finally, file complaints if needed. If you experience any issues, please file a complaint. You can file a complaint with the Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson within the Department of Education. You can file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Some states, including Colorado, have ombudspersons that you can file complaints with as well. And you know, you could do all three of those things, and I would recommend it. Complaints really have a lot of power in shaping policy of the future. You know, they look to that complaint data to see what some of the issues have been. And then, you know, the more complaints that an agency receives, the more likely they are to respond to them and to rectify the situation. And so, yes, highly recommend submitting complaints if you're having any issues. All right, so I know that was a ton of information. Let's get to some of your questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think I noticed one question. Okay, someone asked a question about if they joined a public service agency during the payment pause. So I think this question is about PSLF. So if you joined a public service agency during the payment pause, you know, any any payments that you made, or no, I'm sorry, any months that you were in that employment will count towards PSLF. So say you joined in 2021, any months since, let's say you joined in March of 2021, any payment or any months since March of 2021 will count towards PSLF, as long as you've been employed there and you weren't required to make payments during the pause. But if I would check to see that your loans are direct loans and make sure that you fill out your PSLF forms if needed. All right. Let's see, getting another question here. Okay, someone's asking that they think they applied for I think it's the debt relief plan from President Biden last year, but they're not entirely sure. Can I find that out somewhere? I think that the easiest way to find out for now would be to check your email and see if you got a confirmation email from the Department of Education that says that you applied. I don't know if there's a formalized process for this now, and I'm not sure that it's even like find outable, given that everything's held up in the court system. And so I would hold until the Supreme Court's decision comes down, but the easiest way would be to check your email and see if you received any communiques from the Department of Education, or if you've received that confirmation email. Don't be shy about questions. All right, I'm seeing another question. Is this for students only? So no, most of the things I mentioned on the call are not only for students. In fact, older borrowers are one of the fastest growing demographics of student loan borrowers. And often, when you're in school, your loans are automatically placed into something called in-school deferment. And so for a lot of students, they're not really thinking about their student loans until they graduate, until their grace period is over and they get that first bill from their servicer. So no, certainly these things are not just for students, they're for anyone with student loans, anyone with student debt. And it depends on like the different programs, but yeah, anyone with federal student loan debt are eligible for most of these things, depending on your situation. Okay. The presentation is being recorded currently, and it will be emailed to everyone that registered for the event. And I can also share the PDF of the slides. So that will be sent out tomorrow, and it'll also be sent out with the resources of, that federal student aid ombudsperson, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the state of Colorado ombudsperson as well. Okay, I'm seeing a question about someone who is disabled and applied for loan forgiveness for my disability. And then they got a text message saying that their loan is being moved to payment discharge. So I would, and they're wondering if that's a scam. I think the best way would be to log into studentaid.gov and log into your servicer's account and see what the communications between you and the Department of Education have been recently. It's possible that they would have those forms online. If you also are unsure about it, you could file a complaint with the federal student aid ombudsperson, but I would say checking on studentaid.gov is probably the best way, the first best way to see. I think that this person is maybe talking about total and permanent disability, which is another type of loan forgiveness or cancellation that you can get if you're unable to work and you meet the requirements of that program. And so I would, first check at studentaid.gov and then maybe contact your servicer or look at your servicer's website to see what the most recent, like communications from them have been, and if, if your loans are being discharged from that program. It's a good question. Okay, will people who are not in public service jobs have their accounts reviewed and updated? Yes. So this is meant for anyone who has federal student loans. I think we're talking about the IDR account adjustment right now. So everyone with federal student loans will have their accounts reviewed and updated. And eventually there will be a tracker at studentaid.gov that'll, and possibly your servicer too, that will have, you know, how many months you've been in repayment so that you can keep track, right? Because the goal is to find out how close you are to that threshold of cancellation. So everyone's federal student aid or federal student loan accounts will be reviewed and updated. It's just that, you know, if you are seeking public service and you are in a public service job, that will also count for PSLF. So there are a lot of benefits to like taking some action items this moment in time. Remember that it's going to be automatic. This IDR account adjustment is going to be automatic for most folks, but if you have those FFELP loans that are not held by the Department of Education, you need to consolidate in order to take part in the IDR account adjustment. This is a great question. And yeah, I understand. All right, let's see, any more questions? I'll give it another couple minutes to see if any folks have more. All right, I think that is all then. If there are no more questions, I will be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow with the recording, the PDF, and those resources I mentioned. And thank you for bearing with me on a Tuesday evening right after our national federal holiday. Thank you so much. I hope that this was helpful, and feel free to reach out if you have other questions. All right, thanks. Have a great night, everyone.